let's turn that part off for now. Here we go.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. So I have to say, I've told my story a lot, but not so much in a setting of just biography night or biography. I've been in recovery for 36 years, so you tell your story a lot of it. So it's a different thing.
Excuse me, I'm finding Vivian's voice kind of muffled on Zoom. I don't know that you can do anything about it, but just so you know. Thank you.
Oh, but let's try that again.
It might just be my voice. You're a low talker. Huh? You're a low talker.
So,
So if you could up the volume a little bit, that might be appreciated. If you
Okay, so I was born. Oh, there we go. Right. So I'm going to start with my family of origin. That's a good place to start. That's a little distracting. So some of you know the story, a little bit of the story, but you'll hear this part of it because some of you know. My mother was born in Morocco, and her mother was born in Algeria. She's a Berber Jew. My grandmother was born in like a tent in Algeria. They didn't know her birthday because they didn't write things down at the time. So it's not like way in my ancestry. It's my mother and my grandmother. So we're Jewish. So my mother, on my mother's side, Sephardic Jew. My father's parents were from Russia. Well, I just found out Russia and Poland. So he's Ashkenazi. His parents immigrated to New York, the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and that's where my father was from. He's a Jewish guy from the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And so I don't have Holocaust that I know of anyway, trauma in my family. But on my mother's father, who was from Spain, had a family already before he married my grandmother. In Spain, he had a wife and children, and they were murdered by Franco. So he, on foot, got out of Spain, I guess like a pilgrimage out of Spain with other Jews to run from Franco, and landed in Morocco.
Yeah, this is his.
Yeah.
mute all did not work. Sorry. Keep going.
Okay, so it was many months, trekking through the mountains of Spain and then on a boat to Morocco. So went to the village called Usta, where my grandmother's family had moved to already, and they were arranged to be married. My grandmother, which is unusual, had already been married as well, but her mother had her get divorced from the boy that she married because she was not treated well, treated like a maid, treated like a slave, and brought her back to their original village, which was Usta. So she was arranged again to an older man, because now she's not marriage material. And so that's how, so my mother had 6 siblings and a brother, 6 sisters and a brother. And so they lived in Morocco till my mother was about 10, and then moved to Israel, like a lot of Jews in Morocco and other Muslim territories. So and then my mom moved to Paris to be with one sister who got married, to be near her, to live in Paris, and then to Montreal, another sister got married to Canadians who lived in Montreal for a while. So my dad went to Montreal. I got my mom when he was 30 and she was 19. They got married, and he brought her back to Queens, and they had me. So, and I had 2 years later, I had a sister. My sister was born. So it's just me and my sister. So we lived in, Queens, I don't remember, because we left there when I was a baby. Brooklyn is what I remember. We moved to Brooklyn when I was 2, and we lived in Brooklyn. The first Coney Island, we lived in Coney Island, and I remember Coney Island. I remember going to the boardwalk and rides, and we lived in a place called Luna Park, which was like 5 or 6 buildings, and probably 20 stories high, and my uncle and aunt and cousin lived in one apartment in another building, and another cousin in another building in the same. I think my uncle lived in that same apartment almost till he died. So before I was born, until he was not able to take care of himself until he died. Because people do that in New York, they stay in the same apartment forever. I still have an aunt, she's still in the same apartment in Queens. So my mother. So the things I remember about my family, we had it. It was a very loving. My father was a good man. He was a good father. He was a simple guy. He probably would have been a pilot. He didn't have the money to do a lot of things he wanted to do. They both, came from the Depression, and he was lived in, depression kid. So he became an art. He went to art school and became a commercial artist for printing companies back in the day when it was old fart printers and he did the pay stuff. That was his job. So they had. He was an artist, and he was a good artist, but he probably could have done something with his art, but he was not a risk taker. He was, he wanted to have, the security of a paycheck and a job, even if it was a minimal paycheck. He just didn't have visions. So as I got older and I had bigger visions, he didn't get that. He didn't understand that because it was like not fathomable for him, and something he couldn't grasp. So, and my mother had. My memories of my mother, she was a loving mother, a nurturing mother, but she had mental illness, and she eventually was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. So growing up as the daughter of a borderline, and my sister also does too. My sister came out of the womb screaming and having temper tantrums, and just in a constant rage. And during my childhood, my sister kind of controlled and manipulated my parents because her temper tantrums would go into migraine headaches. And so to avoid the migraine headaches, they always gave it to her. And so if my sister and I were fighting, they always gave it to her. And my mother was difficult. She needed a lot of attention, and and the thing about growing up around mental illness is their perception of reality is way off. And, there's a lot of accusing things that that were just in their head, like you're doing this and you're doing that. So in that, what I could say about growing up in an environment like that, and the confusing, not so much confusing, but the part of it that was, I knew that there were other kids that were, and then teenagers that lived in much more dysfunctional families. And, there was sexual abuse, and there was violence and alcoholism. And although my mother did take pills, but it wasn't violent. So I didn't minimize it. It was just that it wasn't as bad as that. There was love, and the love was strong. I have to say that the love was very strong, and I think that's probably why I wasn't as traumatized, because there was definitely love underneath it all. We were a loving, mushy, huggy, physical family, and and funny. We had, we laughed a lot. There was a lot of laughter in the house too, screaming and everybody's screaming on the top of their lungs, but there's also a lot of laughter. And so I, with my mom and the thing I have, so, let me just get my thoughts together here. So we moved from, my dad, we bought our first house in East Flatbush. And I started, I was about 12 when we moved there. No, I'm sorry. I was 7 when we moved there. So I lived in Coney Island from 2 years old to 7 years old. And I remembered public school, walking to public school in Brooklyn. And, there was a bit of like a little, there were definitely like little elementary school games, so you learned how to survive in a sort of tougher, environment, it was Brooklyn. And so I was not somebody who was a fighter or knew how to fight or would, so I remember like just feeling not fitting in a lot of situations and settings in school. And when we moved to East Flatbush when I was 7, I remember school, and I also have great memories. We used to go to the Catskills in the summertime. That was, we all went to, my dad worked there when he was a kid. Like he was a waiter or a busboy or something at Concord, at Rosingers, in one of the hotels up there, which was a big scene in those days. And I had good memories of that. I was also a troublemaker. I liked to do things even as a little kid for shock value, to just like, I remember I did, just things that were like, just to like shock people. I remember when I was young, when I was small, my cousin was babysitting and I hid in the hamper and I stayed in the hamper for hours and hours and hours. And I could hear people in and out of the house, in the bathroom. I mean, I had clothes on top of me. And I was smaller. And I heard, and then finally I came out and the police were in the living room and the fire department and all my relatives all over New York. So I used to do things like that. Yeah, I had, so there was like a dark, like a little, I don't know, it was a streak in me. And so as I got older, I think I first smoked my first joint. I started smoking cigarettes because, it was just the time of, kids would start smoking cigarettes. Started smoking cigarettes at like 11. And not shortly after that, I smoked my first joint. And I began cutting school early on. And I had a girlfriend that her and I would go to Central Park and Prospect Park. We were probably 11 years old. Oh my God. And just like, go and like walk around and just smoke pot with guys that, we were just little kids. I mean, I can't even imagine that now. If I had a kid now doing that at that age, and I remember I always felt older and beyond my years. And even at a young age, I did. So, my mother was really, just they were starting. My mother was always on me, as probably now it should be, as a mother with a kid that's starting to like get into trouble. And then we moved down to Miami when I was 12. So we moved I went to school in Brooklyn, New York, and we moved to Homestead, Florida. And we went, so it was like the junior high school. It was like going from junior high school in New York to going to junior high school in Alabama. It was like very, it was that kind of energy. And it was a lot of farms and farmers. And, but for the first time, when I just before we left New York, I started like developing breasts, and I had braces before I left New York. So that my braces came off, and I started developing, and I started to like see boys looking at me, as a, and I started to feel my sexuality or feel my sex, just that people were noticing me now as a girl, and then when I got to Miami, I was way ahead of everybody. I was usually behind everybody in Brooklyn. Everybody's like, had more fat, their clothes were in style, and my mother never let me get what I wanted. And so when I got to Miami, I was like 3 years ahead of everybody and everything. So I felt better. I had attention. I was getting attention. So, and I was starting to make out with boys, and I was starting, and I started getting high a lot as a kid. And then just school was, I was too stoned all the time. So my life became sex and drugs at a young age. And I began running away a lot. And my mother would always be, like looking for me. And I remember this one time where I was probably 14 or 15 years old. And I was in a bar, and I looked old. I did look older. You want to look older when you're younger than you look younger. And so I was on the dance floor in a bar. I think it was like a Big Daddy's back then. And I had a cigarette and a drink. And my parents walk in. And I was just like that whole image of the 14 or 15, cigarette in one hand, just drinking another. And so they escort me out. And so they started sending me to therapists a lot, and trying to get me help. And they almost sent me. There was a place that I remember in school that when the kids that were doing drugs, there was a place called The Seed, and it was behavior modification. And so when the kids came out, their heads were shaved, and they were like zombies, and they were like little. It was like totally weird. Then they called them seedlings. And my parents almost sent me to The Seed, and that was like going to a prison, or it was anyway. They didn't, but they were always sending me to therapists, and but as far as in recovery, they talk about it's the disease of addiction, and there is a genetic component, but there's no real way to pinpoint. It was partly the times that we were in that that was the world we lived in. Everyone's getting high, and I was there. I was living in a time, but I also, there was definitely the escaping, wanting to escape part, and not be in reality. And I also think that was part of the times that, and I have to say I'm grateful, and so I'm grateful for everything I ever did, and that I can't imagine my life now not having explored all the drugs and the LSD and in Miami. I ended up getting very, very, very messed up on cocaine because I lived in Miami. I was in Miami. It was a very decadent time in the 70s and 80s. Cocaine was, it was the cocaine capital, and it was definitely a decadent life. We were flying around on private planes, and all those like drug dealers that had a lot of money. That some of them were lawyers and drug dealers, and so it was a time where it was just wild. It was a wild time. Decadent is really the word. And there was a lot of it here in Marin, because I think somewhere in the 70s, it was still like the 60s vibe, still is at times, but not like it was in the 70s. I came out here, and it was a very decadent. I first came to Los Angeles, and I just partied with some, people, and it was decadent. I partied in Marin, and I partied in San Francisco, So I, you know, I said my sex, drugs, and rock and roll days, and that, it got dark. It got really dark. And, you know, and I did, and what was happening was that when people were going on with their lives, you know, eventually they were getting married, going, finishing college, getting on, they were getting on. And I couldn't, I wasn't, I could not stop that lifestyle. And nor did I think I needed to. I didn't think that that was my problem. I knew I had a problem, but I didn't think that was it. Because that meant surrendering, and that meant, and at that time, it was, I just kept thinking that one day I'm gonna find the formula that works for, you know, that used to work when everything was great. And, you know, and more I was doing things and hanging out with the very people I said I would never be with. And you know, and there's a lot of things women do that, you know, just more than what you do sexually, it's that you're selling your soul. Because you can have, you know, I mean, if you're doing all kinds of crazy things sexually, but you're okay with it, great. But it's the selling your soul part. And for me, just being being today, because I'm very, ask Ed, it's like, how can you, me being in a room with people that I'm not resonating with and staying there because I want something from you, like I did in the old days. If I could stay there, if I wanted your drugs, I would stay and hang out in the house for days, even if I couldn't stand you. And today, you know, that's selling my soul. That would be selling my soul, like being around people and knowing that they have something I want, but putting up with them, with everything I hate about them, would be selling my soul. And so in 1985, I was living in Miami, and I was, you have to like do this to me to like remind me of the time. I was living in Miami, partying my brains out. I was, there was a house I went to a lot where I would say, I'm never going back there again. I hate that place, but I'd always go back there. And so one of the, I was friends with a family in Miami, and the owner of Windjammer Cruises. And what? Huh? The owner of Windjammer Cruises. It doesn't exist anymore. But so the father was the owner, and the kids were all working. The kids were all around my age, three sons and 3 daughters. And I was friends in that family. So I went to the father, Mike Burke, and I said, I would like to get a job on a Windjammer. And I hadn't really worked much in my life. And really, I was sort of, you know, I just, you know, like my life was, a lot of things, but not working in a normal job. So what some people refer to as the geographical cure. I thought if I get out of Miami, get away from all these people, my life will get better. So he said, sure, you can take a job on that. And I took a job on a Windjammer. It was out of the Leeward Islands and the Windward Islands, St. Martin, St. Bart's, Nevis, St. Kitts, Seychelles, all these amazing islands. So it was, I lasted only a month. I mean, and the thing is that in the Caribbean, what people in Miami go to the Caribbean a lot because it's close. In the Caribbean, you drink like crazy. So if you don't get, you know, you're not gonna get the drugs you want. It's such a party. Like the rum there is so strong. It's just, you know, so I stay drunk all day and all night. And you party like crazy on those ships, right? And you're drinking until 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, and then you have to be up, you know, serving breakfast at 7 in whites, in your whites. And then, you know, so, but I had, you know, I had some good memories, but for me, it was still, I couldn't do it. It was, you know, I was still drunk, and it was hard work, and I just wasn't into it. And I left the ship, and I got off the ship in St. Thomas. No, we somewhere, yeah, somewhere. And I'm in St. Thomas. I ended up, going to bars, meeting people. I meet a couple, and they said, "Oh, do you know how to sail?" And I said, "Yes." And I didn't. And they were sailing, like really sailing. They had a 60-foot sloop that was really sailing. It was a beautiful boat, and that's real sailing. And they were sailing to Venezuela, and they needed somebody who knew how to sail. And here I am in the middle of the sea, and they don't know how to sail. And they knew that I didn't know how to. I mean, they would say they basically never had a ship on my own because I didn't know what to do. And so the minute we got to Venezuela, we got to an island called Isla de Margarita, and it's off the coast of Venezuela. So the boat was too big to come close to the shore. It was a beach area. So we anchored out, and they would dig me in, walked onto the beach, and it was a fishing, it was like a fishing beach. So there were like stingray parts passing by you. So anyway, I had chores to do. I mean, I was there to work, right? So the very first night, I finished my chores on the boat, and so they bring me to the shore so I can go out to the party, and I had to be back by midnight, which is pretty late for, that they would say they'd meet me back at shore, at midnight. So I think I had a flashlight and I would wave it so they could see me come get me on the dinghy. Well, I met some guy, that's the story of my life, met some guy who had cocaine, and I never made it back. That day, anyway. I made it back the next morning. And that was like pretty much the story of my life. That's how a lot of my life was. So I was up the whole night, hadn't slept, and so I was useless on that, So they knew that it wasn't gonna work out, but they were kind enough to not dump me in Venezuela. And they said, well, we'll take you to St. Thomas so that I would be on American soil. And so that was out of their way. That was not their plan, but they made it their plan to dump me. But it was kind of them to make sure that I was on American soil. So anyway, when I was in St. Thomas and I was working in bars, and is it over 5 minutes? Oh God. Okay. So I called home, and my sister had married. I was 26 at the time, almost 26. And my sister was 24. She had been married for a few years already. And my mother told me that she was pregnant and that they were having their first child. And I was going to be an aunt. And I haven't seen my parents now probably in almost a year. They haven't seen me. And I hadn't called much either. And so I decided that I want to go back to Miami, and I want to be part of this baby's life. And I want to like stay there. So I go back to Miami, and the first thing I do is go back to that house that I said that I left Miami for, because I knew there was so much pleasure. And so anyway, I just went on my binges and binges and binges. My sister had the baby, and finally, when he was about 10 months old, my mother gave him the ultimatum. So I believe in ultimatum. We had kept the F out. So I was living back with mommy and daddy for the majority of time. I could never keep my own place and then keep it together. Or if you want help, we'll help you. But you're not coming around here. We have a baby coming around, and we're all about being grandparents today. So I ended up I started doing my meetings, my 12-step meetings. Not really because I wanted to, and not really because I thought I needed to. I didn't think I needed to. I was like, I don't need help, you need help. But it was really to get people off my back, just to get them off my back. And everybody was kind of getting on my back at this point as well. I ended up getting clean, and I ended up realizing that how spiritual that program really is. And so it was the beginning of, and that was 36 years ago, in 1986. I stopped everything. And, but, and I had started massage school a million times, couldn't finish any schooling before. I finally had finished school, and in 1988, I got my license. And I had really a good life, and life has been really amazing, and lots of stuff in between. I mean, I kind of like 5 minutes. Is that possible?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I wanted to get to the good part. Well, like the healthy part. So, I had, so in 86, I got clean, and I had, my relationship started to get better. It was always rocky with my mother because of her mental illness, and my sister too. They're very demanding, and they just did not. So the thing about, so I want to get into like this dysfunctional family stuff and how we can shift it. So the thing about coming from a dysfunctional family, and me being the addict, even though my mother had those pills, and but I was really. So the focus was on me and my addiction. But so they want you to go get clean, but they don't want you to go get better. Because when you get better, then the truth, and you're going to say you see truth, want truth, say truth, and they don't really want any focus on them. And the truth is focused on them, and they don't like boundaries. My mother and my sister hated boundaries. So when you come from a very boundary-based family, setting boundaries was you're looked at as the betrayer. Once I started to get healthy and set some boundaries, and I didn't cut them off. I think it's case by case where you have toxic people around you. I'm all about conflict resolution and nonviolent communication and trying to figure it out before you cut. And so, I mean, I would have if I had to. If that would have been the healthiest thing, but I managed to just, they fought me tooth and nail with my boundaries. Believe me, they didn't like my boundaries. You and your boundaries. But so anyway, my dad died in 1999, and so I went around. I was with him. I went there. They had a condo. They moved to a condo not far from where I was living. I bought my first house in '97. So I became a homeowner when I was 37 years old. I bought my first house. And, I did well in my massage career, really well. So my father was dying. It was in the dying process. My father, when he was dying, my mother and sister were fighting with me because they that's what they did. They resented, and if I was holding my father's hand, they would, he doesn't want that, leave him alone. And they would really, they just, turned what could have been a beautiful thing into a horrible thing. It was like screaming, yelling, fighting over my dying father, and he was getting all stressed out. So I decided not to go to see him because my presence, they would attack me, and that would stress him out that they were attacking. So in the last week of his life, I didn't see him until I was with him when he died. I finally got with him when he died. But I was really angry and had a lot of resentment at my mother and my sister. And I just was just so angry. I had been paid to be with other friends of mine with their dying family, but with my own family, it was, and that's, now I understand that's all part of the, that was where I came from. So my goal was I didn't want to go, I did not want to feel the resentment anymore. And now my mom is a widow, and she needed me. So I just knew that I'm going to have to put my stuff aside right now, as much as I resent her, and be there for her. And it took a couple of years. I did some work with my family of origin stuff. I did a lot of healing in that, and it took a couple of years. Everything is a process. So when people say you just have to let it go, or just forget about it, or don't think about it, you want to go, no, I need to think about it. I need to process it, and I need to get to the love, and it's not gonna get there if I just let go, right? I need to have my feelings. And I did. One day I just woke up, and I'm so grateful for that. I woke up and I just said, no, my mother it's my stuff. It's my expectations that are causing the fight. My mother will never she'll never see her part in what she did or what she does. And just love her where she's at. I just love her where she's at. And I was like, oh, I can do this now. With love. And all the resentment and all the stuff went away. And I was filled with love, compassion, forgiveness. My sister was difficult. I have love for her, but being around her is too toxic because she's this screaming, fighting thing that doesn't stop ever. But my mother was different. And so, I moved to Asheville, North Carolina 20 years ago, and I was always calling my mom, and telling her I love her. And then when September 2020, when Mother's Day, I called her to say, Happy Mother's Day. I couldn't get a hold of her and I knew something was wrong. And I went down there and she was dying. And I'm gonna leave out the stuff that my sister did right now, but it was like, but I knew my sister was capable of terrible things, but I didn't think she'd really do anything. But she did attempt to do something. And it turned out to be in the benefit of my mother and me, because what happened was I was able to take my mother out of the place that my sister dumped her in. My sister, and she was alone in this place with a daughter who loved her. I didn't know where she was. I didn't know anything was wrong. So I got her into her condo and I serenaded my mom to eternal sleep for the next 3 or 4 months. And it was the most beautiful ending I had. And I got everything I ever wanted from my mother, and she got everything she ever wanted from me. But the thing that was the most important of all the things we did, she was now in a bed in the hospital bed, and I was feeding her and changing her diapers and giving her breathing treatments and her meds, and had her on FaceTime with her sister in Paris every day. And I had Arabic music and I belly danced for her, and whatever she wanted to listen to. She liked Perry Como and who else did she like? Johnny Mathis. And she would always go, oh, he's so romantic. He's gay, That's every time I put Johnny Mathis on. I go, yes, mommy, I know, he's gay. So anyway, that was, she died the happiest I'd ever seen her in my life. In one way. So I think the healing, the shifting that can take place, anything's possible. And I did not think that was going to be the ending in my case, mainly because of my sister. So anyway, that's it.
Questions?
I just wanted to say, my grandmother's family was in Brighton Beach.
So how did you get,
No, go ahead.
oh, sorry. How did you get from North Carolina to here?
Yeah, I didn't. I know I mentioned. My nephew. So there were 3 things happening. Well, it was I'm involved in the Ramdas community, and so my nephew was getting married. He was living in the Bay Area, so he got married in 2017 in San Francisco City Hall. So I came out to get here for the wedding, and I did the wedding, and I stayed in his apartment in San Jose while he was on his honeymoon in Hawaii. And I went to my meetings, I found meetings I liked in San Jose for that week, and I always have my massage table. So I was at a meeting. And then the women, it was a noontime meeting, it was downtown Los Gatos. And the women invited me to have lunch. They go out to lunch together after the meeting, so I went to lunch with them. And then one of the women that was there, they were all asking what I do, where I'm from. And so she said, "Oh, I need a massage. Can you follow me home when we're done with lunch?" I said, "Sure." So I gave her a massage. And after the massage, she asked if I would like to do, she organizes a spiritual retreat in Yosemite. That was April at the time of 2017. She organizes a spiritual retreat in Yosemite in September every year. And would I like to do massage there? And they give me my own cabin on the river, and I keep all the money. And I was like, yeah. I think, sure, I'll do that. So that was on the, I knew I was going to come back in September to do that. And that has been my yearly gig, except for the COVID years. But I took a break, but I did it this September. So anyway, when I came to Marin to visit somebody, and I started coming to the Bay Area, I just fell in love with the Bay Area. And I just started to resonate with the people and the energy, and so much of it was my energy, my frequency. And so I didn't know that it was a process, I ended up coming out, checking it out first to see if I can make it, because there's a fantasy of living someplace and then reality. And so here I am. And then I found Marin Valley. I met a woman in a meeting, don't know her name, never saw her again. But she told me about this place.
Right, first I wanted to introduce Michelle, this is Todd, and we're the new owners of 9 Fallen Leaf, so I just want to say hello.
Hey.
Where's 9 Fallen Leaf, who lived there before? So thank you so much, that's really, I really wanted to make it here. I met Vivian through a friend in Fairfax, who live in Fairfax right now, and what I wanted to hear more about was the Ram Dass. And how did you make that connection? Because that's how I see you, as that kind of spiritual.
So the thing, there's so many things in my life that I didn't have time. I was going to write some bullet points, but I just thought, it's coming from my heart. This is where it comes from. So I've always, I lived in a communal house when I was, so I had these dual parts of me, right? I was this person who wanted spirituality and was meeting spiritual people when I was younger, but also couldn't stop drugs and alcohol. And I lived in a communal house in Coconut Grove in Miami. And the owner was friends with Ram Dass. And so I didn't know who that was. I think I was 18 or something. I didn't know who Ram Dass was. And so everybody's making a big deal. Ram Dass is coming to the house tonight because he was coming to Miami to speak at maybe some hall. And so Ram Dass comes to the house, and everybody's making a big deal. And so then we all go to see Ram Dass speak that night, and then I got it. And so whenever Ram Dass spoke, and I was close enough to drive to wherever he was speaking, I would go see Ram Dass. And when I moved to Asheville, North Carolina, and so I loved, I love kirtan, I love yoga, I love a lot of things. Sufi practice, Buddhist practice. So when I moved to Asheville, North Carolina, I was invited to someone's house for kirtan, satsang. And the guy had been with Ram Dass in the early days, and through his new Prabhupada. And the person who was leading the kirtan was the person who runs the whole Ram Dass Foundation, Love, Serve, Remember, Ram Dass, Biography. They're all in Maui right now. So that was the other part of it. I was going to Maui as well, the Ram Dass retreat. After I left, when I left my nephew's wedding and went down to LA for a little bit for something, and I went to the Ram Dass. But I met Robbie Marcus and he ran, and so we became good friends. And so then it was wonderful because all these amazing people would come to the house, and we had dinner with Krishna Das in the house, and were all these wonderful people that some of Joan Holocaust, they know everything. So it was wonderful to be in that environment. It's such a close, so close. Right now they're all and I'm jealous. So,
The air quality's not so great over there right now, though.
because of the Maui. It's about.
Yeah, Maui gets it from the Big Island.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, then, okay, then I'm.
So you're better off here.
Any other questions or comments?
Anybody on Zoom?
They hung in there with this disturbance, but we have 4 Zoomers.
4 people?
Yep, 4 different parties.
I just want to say that I'm glad that you made it through the other side. It sounds like a tortured life, but then I guess I'm happy. Well, that's good. But I'm really glad that you made it out. This is a much healthier way.
Yeah, I don't think it was tortured. It was what it was.
It sounded to me.
Oh, really? Yeah, I
But
think.
no, I mean, you were happy, so I shouldn't. It's just a lot of.
Well, I think that, we go through what we go through for a purpose, right? Everyone has a purpose. I can't imagine not having any of those experiences. That, first of all, we wouldn't be who we are today if we didn't have if we didn't experience what we experienced. I love myself today. Took a while. Does somebody want to say?
Fascinating story. I don't see anything
Oh, okay.
in the chat, but the recording will be available, and people usually stop you on Marin Valley Drive and go, I saw that. So briefly, you're a celebrity. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.